Multiversal stories are everywhere right now. They're just a fun little idea to sprinkle into a sci-fi narrative. Somewhere out there could be a reality where anything that could happen has happened. This idea has shown up in Rick and Morty, Community, Futurama, and even earlier than that with Star Trek the original series having an episode with the evil mirror universe back in the 60s. Of course, the best use of the multiverse by far dominated last year's award season with the film Everything Everywhere All at Once. The cast and crew gave the performances of a lifetime in a film that used the concept of the multiverse. But the story was actually about how empathy is the most powerful force of all. Our main character, Evelyn, traverses the infinite multiverse after an alternate version of her husband, Waymond, explains that every choice leads to a new universe. She starts out traveling to worlds that are just similar enough to our own until things get more and more off the walls. The realities where she's just a sign spinner to ones where she has hot dog fingers. And this is all to stop an alternate version of her daughter, Joy, who was driven to nihilism after seeing the true meaninglessness when she was compared to infinity. Evelyn learns by the end that even if everything is meaningless, why not try to still be compassionate because other people still matter? If you haven't seen the film, I'm not even scratching the surface of how good this is. But it really did earn every single flower it was praised with. Yet, this wasn't the only major film released around that time that involved the multiverse. Of all the things that Everything Everywhere did right, well, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness kind of botched.
We have experience of the multiverse.
I don't believe you.
Which was meant to be the lead into the rest of the multiversal films Marvel has planned. And even Sony's Spider-Verse films have been knocking it out of the park, but are very clearly meant to be their own thing and just barely connected to the MCU. Things are kind of crazy at Marvel Studios right now. The writer's strike pushed a lot of the productions back. The more recent projects lack that connective tissue that the older entries have had. And at this time, there doesn't seem to be any upcoming films that can truly set up the big climactic ending that was promised. It looks like the entirety of the Multiverse saga is really going to have to rely on Loki Season 2 until Fantastic Four comes out in a few years, and then we're immediately going into the next Avengers films. Maybe Deadpool 3, but that's got an entirely different can of worms to worry about. I believe Marvel already has the perfect source material to get things back on track, and has already been one of the most interesting takes the Marvel Cinematic Universe has done so far. Marvel's What If, both the comic books and what they should do next with the show. In 1977, Roy Thomas wrote What If #1. As what would go on to become the standard intro for the series, Uatu the Watcher explains directly to the audience that this is just one of the many multiverses, and one divergence can change everything. The first story is, what if Spider-Man had joined the Fantastic Four? This directly references the first issue of his run in Amazing Spider-Man #1, when Spidey jokingly asked the Fantastic Four if he could join them since he wasn't making any money being a superhero by himself. In the main story, they brush him off, but in the What If story, they accept, and now they become the Fantastic Five. Things are great. Peter is now financially secure, the people now love him, and taking down supervillains is just so much easier now. But Sue Storm is now the odd one out, and even though she took down the Vulture, she's forced to stay back at the Baxter Building so the boys can go handle things. Because, Reed Richards is a trash person in every single reality. So, yeah, she leaves his ass for Namor, and Peter really regrets how awkward he made things. It all came down to that one choice Peter made by asking that ruined Reed's marriage. But if I'm being honest, she dodged a bullet. For the most part, this is how many of the comics go. They just take a very important issue and just tweak things very slightly. What if Wolverine killed the Hulk in Logan's first appearance? What if Thor became the Herald of Galactus? What if Dazzler became the Herald of Galactus? And a lot of these stories ended up happening later on down the road. Like, Spider-Man did join the Fantastic Four. Twice. And Jane Foster does eventually become Thor, which happened all the way back in 1978, except this time she called herself Thordis and later marries Odin. Or if Peter never married Mary Jane, which is just a whole thing right now, and every single Marvel fan hates this dude named Paul.
You tell Paul to go f*** himself.
Or what if Spider-Man's clones never died, which actually ended up being an entire thing that took over the 90s. And the Punisher actually did become the Herald of Galactus when he became the Cosmic Ghost Rider. There are actually many stories of people not dying, like Gwen Stacy, Bucky, Captain Marvel, Elektra, or Uncle Ben. But I have to say, the most heartbreaking story in the entirety of the What If series is what if Punisher's family hadn't died in Central Park. In the main series, Frank Castle takes his family out for a nice picnic in Central Park when they just happen to accidentally see a mob hit. As it starts to rain in the What If comic, though, they choose to leave early, and seeing the family leave makes the mobsters wait just a little bit longer before they start killing each other. With the entire Castle family alive and well, Frank becomes a cop and gets to become the father he always wanted to be while he was fighting in Vietnam. He watches the superheroes from afar, and life is good. until he notices cops selling drugs and taking bribes. They try to push him to become crooked as well, but he instead documents every single dirty cop in New York. And some things are inevitable. After Frank tries to report them, those cops kill Frank Castle's family. With the world now thinking he's dead too, he guns down the cops, judges, and police chief who are all secretly working for Kingpin. You can't outrun destiny, and he was always bound to wear that skull. It's also kind of important to note that we didn't actually see his origin story play out until Punisher Year 1, when it came out in 1994, a whole 5 years after this What If comic. So seeing him happy and losing it all again just leaves the audience crushed. And pulling that kind of emotion out of your readers is just fantastic writing. And that's the constant theme that runs throughout the What If comics. Choices versus destiny. And it's these choices that give the characters in the story that give anything any kind of weight or stakes to them. And within most adaptations of multiversal stories, there's a glaring issue that there just aren't too many stakes involved. It's like how Rick Sanchez can just up and leave one reality if things get too bad for his liking and just hop into another. But that's not a problem from a writing standpoint because that's literally a running plot point in the show. And it's specifically looking at how nothing matters to the literal infinite also drove Everything Everywhere's joy to nihilistic madness. It's probably for the best that Marvel doesn't tread on that ground since it's already been done twice far better. And I mean, they already did use that one character from the comics that embodies nihilism. And the MCU has kind of dropped the ball in that area. Sure, it was impressive watching Wanda run through the Illuminati and Doctor Strange, but that all means nothing in the overall story when we all know that Wanda's eventually going to go back to being a good guy, so we're all just going to have to forget the fact that she doomed an entire reality by killing off their mightiest heroes. But do we even care about that reality? All we know about it is that they have green stoplights and technology that randomly gives exposition.
No, not the beast! Not the beast!
And then there was the very much needed explanation of how any of this works because it's very contradictory at the moment. And having one figure like Uatu come in and clarify things could actually fix everything. Endgame tells us that taking out a stone is what creates a new reality. Then, by the end of the film, Steve Rogers time travels, then comes back not as he was, but as an old man on a bench. And the only way for any of that to make sense later on is if he chose to go live in a new timeline when he was returning the stones, and just came back to give Sam the shield. You just kind of need to ignore what the actual writer said in an interview to make any of this make sense. And I mean, if Cap used Black Widow's wristband to come back just before the battle, since, she wasn't using it anyways. But moving on. Then the Loki series gives us another explanation. Going off a given path creates a Nexus event for a new branch timeline, and I think they're actually talking about it creating a new reality, but since there isn't too much interference from other dimensional beings, I don't think there's too many timelines that are genuinely created. The TVA is all a ruse anyways by the one who remains to stay in power, so everything that they say can just be taken with a grain of salt. Like, they give the example, even if you're late to work, creates a whole new timeline, but maybe you're going to already show up late anyways in your own timeline. Wouldn't you need that push from an outside source to make that branch in the timeline to create the Nexus event? Loki is solid. Not perfect, but I liked it. Even though it's never outright said, this also allows the use of multiple actors to portray another version of a character from another reality or timeline. They can be different ages, genders, race, species, or even look exactly like the main version we all know. They're just called variants. And that really is the perfect term. Glaringly obvious for comic book fans, but if you're just a movie fan, comics sometimes have alternate covers for a single issue, and those are called variant covers. I don't recall if any of the big breakdown channels mention that, but I just think it's neat. And this brings us to Across the Spider-Verse and the idea of canon events, and how there can be countless different versions of Spider-Man, but they're all still similar enough. I'm not going to go too deep into it because spoilers, but canon events are moments so pivotal to a character regardless of reality, they must happen. Getting bitten by a spider, loss of a loved one, and they even say loss of a police captain, even though we didn't see that with Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man, and it hasn't happened yet in Insomniac's Spider-Man game. Unless that's a hint for what's going to happen to Captain Watanabe in the next game. I don't know. I think it's the choices that the characters make that spit in the face of destiny that actually create the branches and timelines. That's why nothing Loki or Sylvie did during Doomsday events actually create any timelines. The destinies of everyone else seeing the Lokis and their outside interference just couldn't alter anything. Every choice made in What If was at a pivotal moment, and the Disney Plus show highlights this with the perfect moments from the MCU thus far. What if Peggy chose to volunteer instead? What if Yondu chose to go to Wakanda instead of Missouri? What if Doctor Strange tried to change an absolute point and go against destiny? I'm going to assume that absolute points and canon events are referring to the same thing, and if so, This one episode probably laid more groundwork for the rest of Phase 5 and 6 than anyone realized. Maybe that's why we see all the destruction of multiverses portrayed with the same black ink. I really want Marvel to put more of a focus on the What If show. It has an interdimensional being that can just clarify any of the inconsistencies, and it wouldn't seem out of place. And if the plans for everything are as up in the air as they seem, well, it does have a good track record so far. We all know why Marvel is using this very specific plot device. It's easy to write in cheap applause for fan-favorite character entrances without having to jump through any of the continuity loops to get it done. Disney plans on getting their money's worth with that Fox Merchant Sony partnership. Case in point, the awkward silence after each character is introduced so audiences can scream in the theater. And yet it's just there in the home release, not trimmed or re-edited anyway. And I really don't want to think of multiverse stories like that. They can be cheap, sure, but after the buzz has died down, I genuinely hope Marvel can correct the trajectory and blow us all away with something amazing with the rest of the story. But what do you guys think? I'd love to read your comments down below. And if you liked this week's video, please hit that like button. And of course, subscribe for more weekly content on comic books and nerd stuff. I've been Eric, and you've been awesome.